So in this video, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at some Japanese signs that were translated poorly into English and try to figure out why they turned out the way that they did. So I handpicked a couple of examples that I think are interesting, and so these are going to be examples that we can actually analyze. There's not going to be like typos because there's not much to them. These are actually examples that the poor translation is a result of some form of interference from the source language. So we're going to try to analyze those, and maybe in the process we can learn something about Japanese grammar or vocabulary. I'm also going to be putting these signs through a Google Translate test, so I'm going to be inputting the same signs into Google Translate and see if it does a better job than whatever was used in each example. The first example we have here, お蕎麦を口に入れ、一息ですすって召し上がる, which is translated as buckwheat noodles are put into a mouth, and it sniffles and has et a breath. So it's supposed to be you put soba or buckwheat noodles into your mouth and then you slurp them in one go. You can see this word here, hitoiki. It has multiple meanings, and this is going to be a theme throughout this video. So hitoiki can mean one breath, which is what the translation ended up being. If you look at the characters and translate them one by one, it is one breath. And it can mean that, but this phrase, hitoiki de, also means to do something in one go. And the next word is susuru, which is a verb that again can mean to sniffle, as we can see in the translation, generally in the phrase hana o susuru. But it can also mean to slurp or to sip, and this is what it actually is supposed to be. You can also see that the translation is struggling with what the subject of the sentence is supposed to be, because it says it sniffles. And this is going to be another theme throughout the video, which is Japanese is a contextual language. A lot of times the subject isn't overtly stated, and so you have to figure it out from context, and machine translation sometimes doesn't really do a great job at that. But this phrase actually passes the Google Translate test because you can see that this translation is correct. So the next example is a little longer, so we can see お願い赤ランプの点灯またはブザーにお気づきの方は救助にご協力ください, which is translated as the direction of a companion mind should cooperate with rescue at lighting of a red lamp or a buzzer. So the first word that I want to highlight is this one, and this word, well, it can be two words depending on how you read it. So what this is supposed to be is kata, which is like a polite way of saying a person. Again, another theme that you'll see throughout these signs is that you have a lot of polite language, a lot of like honorifics and stuff like that. But if you read it as whole, it means direction, which is what the translation ended up being. And then, I don't know how the hell this happened, but the word before that, which is okizuki, ended up being translated as companion mind, which, again, that's not what it means. So it comes from the verb kizuku, which means to realize. So this phrase is supposed to mean people or a person who realizes something. But I guess if you break down this word into two components, that's how you get companion mind, because ki can be translated. It's a very general word. It's used in a billion expressions, but it can mean mind. And then this other part, zuki, which comes from tsuki, that was translated as companion. It means like to like attach something, to like accompany, I guess, which is where you get companion. So you have companion mind, which is definitely not what this means. And then the second part, お近くの非常電話より連絡をお願いいたします which is, please give me connection from a nearly extraordinary telephone. So the first thing that I want to highlight here is another polysemous word. Polysemous meaning it has multiple meanings, which is 非常, which can mean extraordinary, but in this case it doesn't. It means emergency. So this is not an extraordinary telephone, it's an emergency telephone. And then the next word, which you can barely see because of the watermark, 連絡, which is translated as connection, and it can mean that, but more commonly it's used to mean contact, like to contact someone. So I've just noticed this first word, お近くの非常電話. So that's also not translated correctly. It's not supposed to be nearly, it's supposed to be nearby, like a nearby phone. And I'm assuming the reason is that 近く is in fact the adverbial form of 近い, which means close or near. So 近く does mean nearly or closely, I guess. But this is just a quirk of this adjective, is that you don't say like 近い電話, you say 近くの電話 to mean, even in English it's kind of the same. Like you don't say a near phone or a close phone, you say a nearby phone. So this is kind of the same here. And the Google Translate test is passed again. It's a pretty decent translation. Next up, お客様へ地球環境保護のためトイレットペーパーの使い切りにご協力ください. Please cooperate with toilet paper using up for global environment protection. The first thing that I want to talk about is this word 使い切り, which is mistranslated as using up. 使い切り means disposable, so it's asking you to cooperate by disposing toilet paper, which, I mean, that seems kind of obvious. I don't know, does that really need a sign? Like, what else are you going to do with, like, a shit-stained toilet paper? Are you going to, like, take it with you as a souvenir? I don't know. The reason this is translated like this is likely that the verb 使い切る, which is where this phrase comes from, does mean to use up, like to use something up completely. 切る can be used as kind of like an auxiliary verb to mean, you can attach it to other verbs and it can mean to do something completely. But this is not the case here. I mean, why would using up all the toilet paper help the environment? It's kind of counterintuitive. And one more thing that I want to call attention to, this phrase, there's nothing incorrect about this here, but there's going to be a couple of these, but there's just a few phrases that you'll see a lot in these signs. A lot of them are, like, as I said, honorific phrases. So this phrase ご協力ください, which means please cooperate, is just like one of a billion ways in Japanese to soften an imperative. We even saw that in the previous sign, so we'll see that a bit. And actually, Google Translate is struggling here a little bit because it too translated 使い切り as using up all the toilet paper, which doesn't make much sense. So this next sign, I mean, whoever took this picture is like, come on, you just try a little harder. Like, you can't see shit. Let me fix that up for you a little bit so you can actually see what's written there. So it says, 足元の段差に注意願います. Please note the difference of one's feet. So, 足元, even though it does include the word for feet, doesn't mean feet. It means like the ground at your feet. In English, we could, I guess, translate it as your step, like watch your step. The second phrase, dansa, it's translated as difference, but it means like a difference, like a level difference, as in like steps. You know, you have one step and you have another step below that, and so you want to be wary of that difference in ground level at your feet, which is what the sign is supposed to convey. So I would just translate it as watch your step. Google Translate is a little bit more fancy, or a little bit more literal, but I mean that is what it means, so good enough. So actually we have another sign with ashimoto. We have ashimoto ga warui baai ga arimasu node go chūi kudasai. Because there is the situation when a step is bad, please be careful. In this case, it is actually translated as step, but that doesn't really work in this phrase specifically. I mean, if you translate it directly, ashimoto ga warui, it is step is bad, but that just means the ground at your feet may be a little bit unpredictable. And then this next word, bai here, it does mean a case or a situation, but if you translate it literally like this, it doesn't really work. The phrase, bai ga arimasu is just supposed to mean that something may happen. I think Google Translate offers us a really nice translation. Please be careful as the ground may be uneven. Moving on, 調整中、お手を触れないようにお願いします。Under adjustment, please do not touch your hand. So the reason for this mistranslation is that the word to touch in Japanese there's a little bit to it. So we have two kind of main verbs, sawaru and hureru, which both mean to touch. Both also are spelled with the same character. But sawaru is a transitive verb, meaning that it takes an object and you would use it pretty much the way that you would expect to use it. So you mark whatever you touch with the direct object particle, and you mark whatever you touch that thing with the instrumental particle. But hureru is an intransitive verb in general, so it doesn't mean that you're actively going out of your way to touch something. In general, it has more of a meaning that something just touches something else, as in like it's adjacent to it. So if we look at the same phrase from the previous example and we use this verb with it, you'll see that the thing that is being touched is instead marked with the indirect object particle, and whatever touches something else is now the subject. However, with this verb, there's also the phrase te o fureru, which just means to touch something with your hand. But if you translate it more kind of directly, it's like you're touching your hand to something else. And especially if you remove the thing that you're actually touching, as it's done in this particular sign, then, well, yeah, if you translate it directly, it does mean to touch your hand, but it doesn't mean that you're touching your hand, it means that you're touching your hand to something else, if that makes sense. Thankfully, Google Translate seems to have no issue with the sign, so that's good. Stop. It cannot come in from here. これより先はレストランになります。ご希望のお客様は入り口よりご案内いたしますので、スタッフまでお声をかけてください。Which is translated as, the point becomes a restaurant from this. Since the visitor of hope shows around from an entrance, please speak to the staff. Yeah, that's not great. That's not what it means. First, let's look at this word gokibo. So, kibo does mean hope, but I guess if you translate gokibo no okyakusama, it does mean the visitor or the client of hope, but that's not what it means. So, in this kind of context, the word hope means that you want to do something. So, the clients who want to do something, in this case, enter the restaurant, should speak to the staff or whatever. Another thing that I want to point to, and this is going to be a longer segue, is this little word here, which is the particle wa, which is something that you're probably going to learn when you learn Japanese very early on. And it's something that can be quite confusing. I know that it was to me when I first learned the language. It was like, it's a topic particle? What the hell is a topic particle? What is a topic? And it took me quite a while to figure out the general gist of how this particle is used because, well, I wasn't familiar with any languages that had a topic marking. So the hint is pretty much in the name. It's a topic marker, which means exactly what it sounds like. It marks the topic, i.e., whatever we're talking about. So this means that it doesn't mark the preceding word as having any specific function in the sentence. It doesn't say that, oh, this is the subject, or this is the object, or whatever. It literally just means this is the topic. Like, this is what we're talking about, and that's it. Other than that, the word could be, it could be the subject, it could be the object, it could be like an adverbial phrase. I mean, if you look at these examples, Kuma wa nemutteiru, a bear is sleeping. Here is the subject. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but that's the most obvious interpretation of this sentence. I mean, it couldn't be the object to begin with because we don't have a transitive verb here. But the second sentence, sakana wa tabenai, it could mean fish don't eat, in which case, again, we have subject marking here. Or we don't have subject marking, we have marking of something that happens to be the subject. And it would mean fish don't eat, which, you know, apart from the fact that it's not a true sentence, in some contexts, it could mean that. But it could also mean that someone doesn't eat fish. If we're talking about fish, in the context of fish, someone doesn't eat them. And then this last sentence, ashita wa iku, again, this is not subject marking because it's not literally tomorrow that goes somewhere, because that doesn't make sense. It just means in the context of tomorrow, if we're talking about tomorrow, someone goes. So that's the general gist of this particle. Many people often say Japanese is a very contextual language. Well, this is just a very direct way of introducing context. You have a word that literally means whatever's preceding this word is the context and nothing else. We don't say anything else about that word. It's just the context. So in this example here, we have wa, which marks something that happens to be the object, but in the translation it's treated as the subject. It says, since the visitor of hope shows around from an entrance, but it's not the visitors that show people around, which again makes no sense if you think about it logically. It's the visitors that are shown around. So it's like saying, again, with regard to the visitors, we will show you around from the entrance. We'll have some more examples with wa very shortly to hopefully clarify what I've been talking about for the past couple of minutes. But I've just noticed there's a misspelling here, and actually in the original text, it doesn't say stafu, it says stafu, which is, yeah, that's not how this word is spelled, even though that part, ironically, was translated correctly, despite the misspelling. Anyway, Google Translate has done a really good job with this sign, which is nice to see. And we have another example of exactly the same kind of thing that we just saw in the previous sign. So, 卵料理はメニューの中からお好きなものを選びいただき、調理いたします. The egg dish will cook the choice from the favorite one, which again is translated, the egg dish is treated as the subject in the translation, but in the original it's supposed to be the object. And again, if you think about it logically, it makes no sense for a dish to cook something. It makes perfect sense for a dish to be cooked. And again, Google Translate does a really nice job with this sign. So just to show you a few more examples with wa, here we have two more signs. We have the first one features, well, it's the opposite issue of what we encountered before. In this case, we have wa marking something that's the subject, but in the translation, it's treated as the object. So we have staffu igai wa o te o furenai de kudasai. We also have a comeback of our good old friend te o fureru, which in this case is translated correctly. But what isn't translated correctly is everything else. So please do not touch anyone except the staff. So it's not supposed to say that you're not supposed to touch the staff. It's supposed to say that if you're not staff, you're not supposed to touch. And then we have the sign on the right, Taminaru nai wa kien to natte orimasu. The inside of a terminal is giving up smoking. And in this case, we have whatever precedes wa being treated as the subject. When it's not the subject, it's not the object either. It's just an adverbial phrase. So with respect to the inside of the terminal, we have another issue here. So kien is another word which has multiple meanings. It can mean to give up smoking, but it also can mean that you can't smoke. Even if you fix that, it's not the terminal itself that is banned from smoking. It's with regard to the inside of the terminal, smoking is prohibited. We have another sign, and there's a lot to look at here. So, お客様各位お会計後にトイレをご利用される場合、ご利用時だけでなくお帰りになる際もレジにお声をかけてください。First off, we have the word お会計, which 会計 is translated as accounting here. It says after accounting. 会計 does mean accounting. For example, 会計士 is an accountant, but it can also mean, especially if it's, like in this case, preceded by the honorific prefix o, it can mean a restaurant bill, like paying the bill at a restaurant. So this is supposed to mean after you pay for your food. Another thing that I want to point to, this is, even if it's mistranslated, it still makes sense because it says when the restroom is used after accounting. And the reason that we have this passive voice here is because of this word sareru here, which is, in fact, the passive voice of the verb suru, which means to do. So, ryo sareru does mean to be used. However, even if it makes sense in the translation, that's not the original meaning. As is surprising to probably no one, Japanese has many ways of conveying politeness and honorifics and that kind of stuff, and this is actually one of them. So what you can do is that if you want to be polite to someone and you're talking about an action that they're undertaking, in this case you're talking to clients, and you want to be polite to clients, and it's the clients that use the bathroom, so you can turn this verb to use into an honorific phrase. And one of the ways that you can do that is to use passive voice. And so in this case, this phrase doesn't refer to the restroom being used, it just refers to you using the restroom, but it's polite. So this first part means when you use the bathroom after paying. And then another issue is with the word reji, which is translated as cash register, and it does mean that, but it can also be used to refer to someone who stands at a cash register or a cashier. And then the cherry on top of the shit cake is the translation of the phrase koe o kakeru, which is translated as multiplying the voice, which might surprise you, but it's not what that means. So the verb kakeru is a verb that means just about anything. It has like a billion meanings. And one of these meanings does happen to be to multiply, as in like to multiply 2 by 2. However, the phrase koe o kakeru doesn't mean to multiply your voice, because that makes no sense. It just means to call out to someone or to inform someone of something. In fact, we've had this phrase before in one of the previous signs, but in that case, it was translated correctly. So this whole sign is supposed to mean, if you want to use the bathroom after you pay, please tell the cashier not only when you go to the bathroom, but also when you return from it. I don't really know why, but whatever. And Google Translate seems to have handled this sign a little better than the original. We also have a return of our friend it, which, again, I mentioned this before, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. Japanese doesn't usually specify the subject as often as English does. I mean, in English, you have to specify the subject in every sentence. In Japanese, that's definitely not required at all. And a lot of times you just have to guess. And in this case, it resulted in a little bit of an unfortunate translation because, well, the rest of the sign is filled with these very polite expressions, but also in the middle of it, you refer to the customer as an it. Actually, the original phrase is just completely impersonal because it would translate to something as not only at the time of using, but also at the time of returning. There's no mention of who does the using or returning. We have another picture with absolutely dog shit quality, so let me fix that a little bit, at least for the sentences that we're going to be analyzing. So let's look at the second sentence first. We have a return of another one of our good friends, kakeru this time, which, as I mentioned, is a verb that has many meanings. And in this case, as I see, it's also mistranslated. 白い扉には荷物をかけないでブース内の棚をご利用ください. Please use the shelf in a booth for a white door without covering a load. Load is a translation of 荷物, but that's not what it means here. It just means your things, your belongings. And then kakeru doesn't mean to cover here. I'm assuming it means to hang. And this says, don't hang your things on the white door. Another sentence that I want to take a look at is the first one. So it says, シャワーブース脱衣所での場所取りはご遠慮ください, which is translated as taking the place in a shower booth and a dressing room should withhold. And yes, should is misspelled. That's not me. That's also the case in the original. So this word here, bashotori, is translated as taking the place. I'm pretty sure it means like securing a spot. You know how like before a concert, like some people like camp out the night before so they can be sure that they get tickets or whatever? Apparently it's something along these lines. So I guess you're not supposed to like be calling dibs on spots in the changing room. And then another phrase that you'll see a billion times on signs like these is go enryo kudasai, which enryo suru means to refrain. So it means please refrain from doing something. So it's a way of softening a negative imperative this time. And then we have another example of wa thwarting the efforts of our translators, because it's not taking the place or whatever that is supposed to refrain from something. It's you who's supposed to refrain from doing these things. The Google Translate isn't doing a perfect job here because it translated bashotori as reserving spots, which it doesn't really make much sense that you're not supposed to do that. That's what a reservation is for. You're not supposed to be reserving spots on your own, if you know what I mean. Another sign and another example of the verb kakeru. This time it's actually translated correctly because it's translated as to hang, which is actually what it means in this context. However, there's also a part of this sentence that's translated less than ideally, and that's the first word, shomeikigu, which is translated as light's instrument, which is not what that means. It means like light fixtures. It would be correct if you broke this word down into its two components, because these two words on their own do mean light, as in like lighting, and then instruments. But this sentence, 照明器具にタオル、衣類、カーテンなどをかけないでください, is supposed to mean don't hang towels, clothes, or curtains on the lights, on the light fixtures. I'm going to ignore most of this sign because there's not a lot of interesting stuff to look at. I mean, the translations are just clunky, but they work. But this final sentence is a little bit funny, so it says, 鏡にもたれたり、硬いものをぶつけたりしないでください, which is translated as don't lean on the mirror and throw the thick staff to it, which unfortunately in the original sentence there is no staff that's thick. 硬いもの means hard things. I mentioned this in my previous video, but this word katai, you can spell it in like 3 different ways, and it has like slight nuances depending on how you spell it. So what you can do is what they did here. You can pussy out and just spell it in hiragana, and then you don't have to worry about nuances. And Google Translate also seems to deny us the thick staff dream. Moving on, we have お願い、この先は危険ですので、これ以上前へ行かないようにお願いいたします. The future is dangerous. Don't go any further, please. So the term that's mistranslated here is konosaki, which has 2 meanings. So it can mean ahead, as in like beyond this point in terms of space, or it can mean ahead, as in beyond this point in time, which is where you get the future. But it's not supposed to be the future, it's supposed to say it's dangerous beyond this point. We had this phrase, or a similar phrase, which means roughly the same thing, on a sign that we saw a few minutes ago, and the translation there was also less than ideal. Thankfully, Google Translate comes to the rescue. And then I said I was going to talk about it, and now's the time. So we have a snippet from a previous sign when some kind of it goes to the bathroom and it also returns from it. And we have another example of a similar kind of issue with a sign that says このボタンを押しても水は流れません, which is translated as even if it pushes this button, water does not flow. Which again goes to show you that in Japanese, a lot of times you have to figure out who does the thing that's mentioned in the sentence? Yourself. And then sometimes you get these unfortunate machine translations that may come off as a little bit rude. I mean, it gives off very it puts the lotion on its skin kind of vibes. But in this case, if it wasn't obvious, it's supposed to be even if you push this button, water does not flow. And Google Translate seems to just pacifize this phrase. So we have another example in the same kind of vein. So, 犬の鳴き声は近隣の方への迷惑となりますのでご注意ください. So, yeah, it's not you who's supposed to refrain from barking, although, I mean, you probably still should. Funnily enough, the original sentence doesn't even talk about refraining from barking. It seems to be completely rephrased, because in the original it says something like, be wary that dogs barking may be a nuisance to neighbors. And Google Translate seems to pick up on that. We have another sign where you can't see shit, this time because of the camera flash, but I'm pretty sure that this is what it's supposed to say. So it says, お客様各位、お客様のお部屋の枕がお気に召さないときには、どうぞ交換してお使いください。また交換された枕はこの場所へ戻してください。We have another mix-up of subjects and objects because it says, when the pillow of the room doesn't like it, exchange and use it please. Where, if you haven't figured it out, it's supposed to say, if you don't like the pillow, you can change it. And you might notice this when you learn any language really, but sometimes verbs that mean the same thing in two different languages take different arguments. And for some reason, it seems to be very common with verbs that mean to like. So this verb here, okinimesu, which is again a very polite way of saying to like, you see that just before it we have makuraga, so the pillow is marked as the subject of the sentence, but obviously it's not the pillow that does the liking, it's just that for this verb, the patient, so the thing that is being acted upon, happens to be marked as the subject. So you might think of it as not the verb that means to like, but as like to be to one's liking. And again, Google Translate offers us a little bit of a better translation. Alright, here we have an example where we don't even have the original Japanese text, but I think I can figure it out even if it's not there. It's probably something like this, このサンプルは食べられません. And the reason I think that is because of the way arguments are marked in Japanese with potential verbs. So potential verbs indicate that something can be done. Now, there are some verbs that are potential just on their own without having to conjugate them, like wakaru, which means to understand, or mieru, which means to be able to see something. And for potential verbs, the patients are marked with the subject particle. So you don't say that you understand something, you say that for you something is understandable. Or you don't say that you see something, you say that for you something is visible. And this is in contrast to regular verbs where the patients are marked as direct objects with the object particle. However, what happens when you take a regular verb like this and then you conjugate it into its potential form, so if you take like the verb to eat and then you turn it into a verb that means to be able to eat, you'll see that the marking changes. So in this case, you'll see that the same sentence, even though it has the same arguments, the argument is now marked with the subject particle instead of the object particle. I will add that when it comes to potential verbs that are derived from base verbs, you can also mark the patient with the object particle. It's not technically supposed to be correct, but many people do it, so it is a thing. However, what I think happened in our example is that the sample was marked with the topic particle, which makes the sentence a little bit ambiguous because, well, now we don't know if it's supposed to be the subject or the object. It's obviously supposed to be the object. You can't eat this sample, but I think, at least I'm assuming, it was translated as the subject, so the sample itself cannot eat whatever. Okay, what do we have here? 爽やかな味と香りが特徴。飲む人を選ばない飲み口の良さが自慢。It features fresh taste and aroma, which is a decent translation. No matter who you drink, you have good drinking spots. Alright, so first thing I want to take a look at is this word here, nomikuchi, which was translated as a drinking spot, but it just means taste, like something has a good taste. And then the next phrase I want to look at is this phrase nomuhito, which is the main source of pain in this translation. So this is a kind of structure that is absolutely ubiquitous in Japanese, and it's basically a way of forming, well, in English we would say relative clauses. So a person who does something, a thing that did this, whatever. The way that it's done in Japanese is that you basically take an entire sentence and then you place it in front of a noun. So in this case we have a very short sentence, nomu, which just means to drink, and we place it before the word hito, which means person, which gives us the phrase a person who is drinking. However, it's not always this simple, because in a construction like this, the relationship between the noun that's at the end of it and the phrase that precedes it is not directly or overtly defined. As in, it's not always the case that the noun is the subject of the sentence that precedes it. So if you take a phrase like kino yonda hon, the most obvious interpretation of this phrase is the book that someone read yesterday. So in this case, the noun that's at the end is actually the object of the verb that precedes it. Now, if you just look at the structure of this phrase, it says read yesterday and then book. So technically, it could be analyzed as meaning the book that read yesterday. I mean, it doesn't really make sense because books can't read. But if it was some kind of magical book that could read, I mean, I guess it could work. What I'm getting at here is that this kind of expression doesn't explicitly define any type of relationship between the phrase and the noun that follows. It just means that they're related in some way. If you take a phrase like hanashiteiru hito, which if you analyze it, it means is talking and then person, it could mean the person that is talking, or it could mean the person that I'm or someone else is talking to, or the person that someone's talking about. This kind of information is just not included in phrases like these, and you have to figure it out from context. So going back to our example, we have nomuhito, which is supposed to mean the person who is drinking, but it was translated as the person who someone drinks, which logically doesn't make sense, but there could technically exist a context in which that would be a viable translation. Actually, this phrase, nomu hito e arabanai nomikushi, first off, it's a little bit of a weird sentence to translate, but also it actually features two of these kind of relative clauses, if you want to call them that. First one we've just talked about, so nomu hito is a person who drinks. But then we also have the noun nomikuchi, so taste, which is preceded by the phrase nomu hito e arabanai, which means doesn't choose the person who's drinking. So it's a taste that doesn't choose who's drinking, which means that it's like suitable for anyone, like anyone would like it. And Google Translate seems to have handled this phrase pretty well. I'm actually surprised. So here we have another example of this kind of structure, and this very well exemplifies the thing that I was talking about. So if you look at the second sentence here, it says, mana o mamotta shin o onegai itashimasu. So if you take this phrase apart, mana o mamotta shin, we have observe good manners and then tasting. But again, it's not the tasting itself that observes good manners. It's just a tasting that involves observing good manners. So this just goes to show you that this kind of phrase just says, hey, the noun at the end, it has something to do with the phrase that comes before it. The phrase before it describes it, but it doesn't give it any specific function. But there's also an issue with this translation because it says, please, I hope sampling that defends manners. And this comes down to the verb mamoru, which one of its meanings is to defend or to protect. But in phrases like mana o mamoru, for example, it means to abide by some kind of rule set or something like that. And this sentence passes the Google Translate test. This first sentence here, though, we have a few issues because it says, ドライバー未成年の方のシーンはご遠慮ください. We have another example of ご遠慮ください. Please refrain. The word 未成年, for some reason, is translated as minority, which that's not what that means. It means minor. It says, please refrain from drinking if you're a driver or if you're underage. The second issue is that says, please refrain from sampling the driver and the minority. So we have another mix-up of arguments and the roles. And the culprit here is this particle no here. No is a possessive particle. You can kind of think of it as the equivalent of the English apostrophe s, or of. So the direct translation of this phrase would be the sampling of drivers and minors. What that's supposed to mean is that it's the sampling by drivers and minors, not the sampling of them as in like you're sampling them. However, this isn't unlike something that you would encounter in English. Like, for example, in English, you can put a noun in front of another noun to create a compound, but the relationship between the two nouns isn't always obvious. So, for example, a firefighter fights against fire, but a freedom fighter doesn't fight against freedom. They fight for freedom. So even though possession isn't overtly indicated in these phrases, if you were to like rephrase them as fighter of fire or fighter of freedom, you have the same kind of ambiguity that you can see on the sign above. Moving on, we have a sign that says Toire o kirei ni go shiyou kudasai, which is translated as please use the toilet finely. And the issue here is the adjective kirei, which has two general meanings. One of them is pretty, which is where you get this finely translation from. The other is clean, so it's supposed to mean please use the toilet in a way that's clean. Actually, I see that this also bled over into the Korean translation because it says 화장실을 예쁘게 사용해 주십시오. 예쁘다 means pretty, and it's supposed to be clean. We have another example of the same exact mistranslation, so it says みんなの歩道橋をきれいに使いましょう, which is translated as beautifully, but it's supposed to be, again, cleanly. And yes, pedestrian is misspelled. What you can also see from these two signs is that the word kirei is spelled differently on either sign, and this just goes to show you that Japanese spelling is a mess, and you can spell things in many different ways. I mean, we've seen examples of that on previous signs as well. The second part of this sign, though, it says 吸い殻、ガム、ゴミなどのポイ捨ては社会のマナー違反です. And this phrase 社会のマナー is supposed to mean like social rules, social etiquette, but it's translated as the society of manners, which, well, it's supposed to be the other way around. It's supposed to be the manners of society or societal manners. I also want to call attention to a phrase used in this first sentence. So it says 使いましょう, which that's not an imperative. It doesn't say use. It says like let's use, which again is another way of like softening the language. I really don't like this kind of phrasing because I know that it's not supposed to be, but it does come off to me as like extremely condescending. I mean, it's straight up out of like a booklet for kids, like, hey kids, remember, let's brush our teeth so we don't get cavities, you know, like. Then again, I do come from a culture where you'll be lucky to even be addressed directly on a sign like that. We don't even get like imperatives, we just get like nouns, like littering prohibition. Actually, Google Translate isn't doing so hot on this one because it translated suigara as water bottles, which that ain't it. It refers to cigarette butts. I'm assuming that it got water from like sui, maybe? Here we have a pretty simple example. So, 危険のため柵の中に入らないでください, which is translated as do not jump over fence for danger. And the culprit here is the word tame. So the phrase something no tame, it can mean for, as in like for the sake of something, but in this case it's supposed to mean because of something. So because of danger, do not jump the fence. We have another example, トイレは駐車場です, which is translated as the toilet is a parking lot, which if you translate that directly, yeah, technically that's what it says, but it's not what it means. So this phrase, something wa something des, is a very basic phrase, and it just means that something is something. However, there's another meaning to it. Usually, when we talk about something being somewhere, as in something being located somewhere, we can use a verb like arimasu or imasu, depending on the animacy of whatever we're talking about. But you can also just say something wa something des, which is what we have in this case. So this is supposed to mean the toilet is in the parking lot. This is a funny example. So we have a whole bunch of like really weird and awkward translations here, but they're mostly like correct. Like you can get the meaning. But I want to take a look at this sentence on the bottom left here. So we have kikenbutsu mochikomi kinshi, which is translated as the ban on a dangerous wealthy person lump. And I think the reason that it did that is that it kind of like separated the words in wrong places. Japanese doesn't use spaces, so you kind of just have to figure out where one word ends and another begins. And so what I think happened here is that instead of the translator parsing this as kikenbutsu mochikomi, which kikenbutsu is like dangerous things and mochikomi means bringing in, so this is supposed to be that bringing in dangerous objects is banned. Instead, it divided it into kiken, which is danger, and then monomochi, which is a wealthy person, and then komi, which I guess could be translated as a lump, and that's how we got a dangerous wealthy person lump. And Google Translate seems to have no issue with this phrase. Actually, it does, because, well, even though the translation is correct, the pronunciation isn't, because it says kikenmono and it's supposed to be kikenbutsu. And then the final example, I saved the best for last because there's a lot of things to look at here. So the first part says, ブース内での喫煙は禁止とさせていただいております。喫煙はスモーキングルームをご利用ください. So the first issue is, once again, with the particle wa. So we have smoking in a booth is allowed to consider as a prohibition, which, again, treats whatever comes before wa as the subject, which doesn't make much sense in this context, because here it's just like a general connection. So when it comes to, or with regard to, smoking inside of a booth, it is considered prohibited. And the same thing happens in the second sentence, because it's translated as smoking should use a smoking room, which again makes no sense, and it's supposed to be with respect to smoking, you should use a smoking room. So if you want to smoke, use a smoking room. The second issue is with this phrase, させていただいております. させていただきます is a phrase that means absolutely nothing. I mean, it does mean something, but it doesn't really add anything to the sentence. Like, you could just get rid of it and just say 禁止です. But, you know, Japanese logic, the longer you make something, the more polite it is. So this is just like honorific fluff. Because this phrase literally just means to be allowed to do something. It's like, I will allow myself to consider smoking prohibited. And then just to add a little bit more to it, we have another phrase that adds absolutely nothing, te orimasu, which is the even more polite version of teimasu, which is like a progressive or continuous form marker. This is just supposed to say smoking in a booth is banned. If you want to smoke, use a smoking room. And then we have the second part. So, ブース内での携帯電話のご利用は禁止とさせていただいております。通話はエントランスホールでお願いいたします。また入店時にあらかじめマナーモードに設定いただきますようご協力お願いいたします。Again, we have another example of させていただいております。In this case, it's translated differently from the first one for some reason. And again, it's just supposed to be using mobile devices in a booth is banned. Another issue is with this word here, entoransu horu, which obviously is supposed to be entrance hall, but it's translated as entrance hole because, well, even though in English, hole and hall feature two distinct vowels, Japanese doesn't have that many vowels, so sometimes when words get transferred from English, they end up just being homophonous. And we have this funny word, mana modo, which is translated very directly as manners mode, which I found out that it means silent mode. And this is just an example of wasei eigo, which is a word that's made up of English words, but it doesn't actually exist in English. It was just made up in Japan. And then this final word, go kyōryoku onegai itashimasu, which I mentioned this before, is asking for cooperation, but it just means like do something. But this resulted in this monstrous translation of I cooperation wish do, which I don't know how the hell that happened, but yeah, go kyōryoku is cooperation, and then onegai is wish, and then itashimasu is to do. But that just means like I wish for your cooperation. So in the end, this is supposed to say don't use cell phones in the booth. If you want to make a call, do it in the entrance hall, and please turn on silent mode before you enter the store. And actually Google Translate made a little mistake at the end here, because it says turn on silent mode before entering the booth. Well, it's supposed to be before you enter the store. So that's all the examples that I prepared for today. This was a pretty fun video to make. If you want like a part 2, I could probably make one. There's like a billion of these online.